There is a lot of myths in the car industry and general misconceptions about cars in general. So today, let's talk about some common ones, a la the Common Car Myths series that I've been doing through YouTube Shorts. So some of these might be familiar if you've watched those before, but let's go ahead and talk about it. And we are, as usual, going to grab a coffee before going to our filming location and enjoy a sip. Did I just say enjoy? Enjoy a sip of caffeine while we chat. Let's roll these windows down while we give her a little startup. It's not totally cold, but I've owned 3 4-cylinder cars and 2 6-cylinder cars before this one, but I have to say there's really nothing quite like a V8. Coffee acquired. Good as always. Now it's time to go to our filming location. Ugh. Well, I guess that makes sense. How did I get these sunglasses on my head? Where's my coffee? That's better. So let's talk about common car myths and let's break down some of these things that I have talked about previously in shorts with a little bit more detail, because oftentimes when I see people in the comments telling me that I'm wrong or that I forgot to add something, it's because it's really hard to cover an entire topic in 60 seconds. So if one of these is a little bit more in depth than normal, that would be why, because I actually have time to explain why these things are the case and hopefully avoid general confusion. So let's start off with the first one that I got, I wouldn't say a lot of backlash, but like 2 people that were very vocal telling me how wrong I was, which was about why modern day cars don't require tune-ups. I don't know how this message got misconstrued into basically that nothing ever breaks on modern cars. I didn't say that at all. Modern cars have a lot of electronics. They're generally more complicated and there is a lot of things that can go wrong. But a general tune-up that is required to an older carb-rated car, like a carb adjustment, but a general tune-up like a carb adjustment or coil replacement, distributor cap replacement, plug and wire replacement, stuff like that, that doesn't need to be done nearly as often on modern day cars as older cars, and let me explain to you why that is. Modern day cars are fuel injected. You'd be hard pressed to find a non-fuel injected car that's been made in the past almost 30 years at this point, especially in countries like America, Europe, what have you. I'm sure there are examples in other countries like China and India and stuff like that, but for the most part, every modern day car is typically fuel injected. A fuel injection system is going to take care of the general parameters around fueling a lot more in depth than a carburetor ever will. And what I mean by that is when you experience changes in environment, like for instance, you go higher up in elevation or the temperature rises significantly or drops significantly, a fuel injection system is able to adjust the amount of air that it's taking in, essentially, and the amount of fuel that the engine is getting to be a lot more precise than a carburetor is ever going to do. A carburetor is a set it and forget it for the most part. But what that means is that in those changes of environment in different situations, it is not going to run nearly as optimal as a fuel injection system will in pretty much any given situation. If you go way up in elevation, most likely a carbureted car is going to be running a bit more rich than normal. That's something that you have to adjust. That sort of adjustment just does not have to be made on a modern day fuel injected car. And in the same sort of way, while there is still maintenance items that need to be replaced on fuel injected modern day cars, don't get me wrong, I never said that there wasn't. Absolutely, things still have to be replaced. However, things on modern day fuel injected cars like a coil pack on spark plug system is not going to have to be replaced typically as often as a system on an older vehicle that is like a distributor cap that has a rotor that makes physical points of contact with these contact points on the distributor cap itself. There's no physical contact that's being made between something striking it on a coil pack the same way that there is with a distributor. And because of that, wear is typically slower and replacements just don't have to be made as often. So once again, I'll repeat, I'm not saying that maintenance does not have to be done on modern day cars. Of course it does, but it's not the same as an older vehicle where it just requires a lot more tinkering and is not going to be as optimized when it comes to the fueling system in any given situation as a fuel-injected car. A fuel-injected car doesn't require you to be as hands-on with it for it to run better for longer, essentially. Another one that has persisted forever throughout the car industry is, of course, that jet fuel will make your car faster. Now, most people that have been into the car industry for a while know that this is not true, but a lot of people, especially that are casually into cars, hear jet fuel and they think jets are fast. It must make my car fast. Well, unfortunately, I mean, not really unfortunately, actually, but that's not how it works. You'll hear myths and whatever all the time of someone being like, oh dude, there was this twin turbo Viper and it got busted by the police and he was like running drugs and stuff or whatever. And like when they caught him, they found out that he had like 2,000 horsepower because he was running jet fuel. I hate to break it to you, but a high performance fuel has nothing in common with jet fuel whatsoever. In fact, something that jet fuel Type A, which is kind of the most common one that you'll normally run into when it comes to jet fuel, is, in fact, jet fuel Type A, which is one of the more common ones that you'll run into, actually has much more in common with diesel fuel or a general purpose heating oil like kerosene that has any similarities to gasoline whatsoever. And obviously we know that if you put something like diesel or kerosene in your car, it's absolutely not going to make it faster. In most cases, it will just destroy your fuel system and make your car break down. So jet fuel Type A actually, believe it or not, can be run in most diesel vehicles without much issue, other than the fact that it doesn't have the same sort of qualities of lubricity that a diesel engine fuel typically has. But otherwise, they're very similar in their characteristics, but that also makes them incredibly different from gasoline. No, jet fuel is not going to make your car faster. It might break it, or bare minimum, it's going to make it run like crap and need a fuel system flush. Another one that is not as persistent, I mean, you don't hear it as often, but I know that I certainly have, and is actually true, is that you can take your key fob and put it against your head for more range. This is a fact, and I know that this is one that kind of sounds ridiculous on the surface. If someone was to tell you like, hey, put your key against your head and it'll give you more range, you might be like, why would that do absolutely anything? Because incredibly simple science, fluid acts as an antenna essentially, and your head has fluid in it, and so by pressing the key fob against your head, it essentially does broadcast the signal slightly wider than it normally would. Hi there. Is there anything you need, or?
Well, my business is here. Not open to the public after 6. Why is the gate not that?
I just come up here occasionally just to film a video, just because I'm here. Try not to bother anyone, you know, people who aren't up in this area and stuff like that. Not trying to, you know, bother anyone. If you need me to leave, I absolutely can. I wasn't aware this wasn't open to the public until after 6. Oh, okay, yeah, I was not aware of that. That's interesting. Absolutely, no problem. Thank you. I appreciate it for letting me know that, for sure. Oh yeah, no, you're just doing your job. I got that for sure. Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah, you don't want to bother anyone else. No, I absolutely respect that. No, I appreciate it for sure. Thank you. Yeah, you too. I just got politely kicked out, but told that I could finish my video, so. So basically your head does just broadcast that signal further as if it's some sort of antenna, and this actually works with basically any contained fluid. You could use your cup of coffee, for instance, or a bottle of water or something like that. It's just simple science. Is it going to make a huge difference? No, it's really not. But you might find that there's a point where if you're in a parking lot or something, you're a decent distance away from your vehicle, you can unlock it when the key fob is up to your head, but you won't be able to unlock it by itself until you take a few steps closer to the vehicle. So is it really that useful? Probably not, but it's kind of interesting, I guess. Now, another huge car myth that I see in the car industry as a whole, especially in the car modifying industry, is that turbos are harder on your engine than superchargers. And that's actually completely inaccurate inherently by the design of each of them and how they work. Technically, a supercharger is always going to be, in theory, harder on your engine, or basically put more load on your engine for it to work than a than a turbocharger would. I'm already messing all of this up. A turbocharger works purely off of exhaust gases in order to make boost pressure to then supply back into the vehicle's intake and give the car more go power. A supercharger, on the other hand, uses the engine itself, basically a pulley that's connected to the crank pulley through a series of different pulley systems and belts to then supply that same boost pressure. So it is taking power from the engine to supply more power to an extent. So if you were to take the ducting that hooks up a supercharger, like for instance a centrifugal supercharger, to the intake of your car, and the ducting that takes boost from a turbocharger and back into the intake of your car, you'd probably notice more of a power drop having a supercharger hooked up that's doing nothing other than sucking power than with a turbocharger. So inherently by themselves, neither one is really that much harder on your engine than the other, but if one of the two of them is generally more efficient and doesn't actually put as much strain on the engine, it would be a turbocharger in itself. But with that being said, a turbocharger system typically has a lot of things to keep track of and more potential for boost leaks and stuff like that, and there's multiple things that can go wrong with wastegates and stuff like that isn't as much of an issue typically with a supercharger system, especially a root style supercharger system that is a self-contained unit just right on top of the intake of the vehicle basically. So typically if you're weighing pros and cons of the two of them, a turbocharger is technically a much more efficient system, and generally you can make more power with a turbocharger at the maximum than a supercharger. These are all generalizations though. I know that, obviously there's exceptions to each and every one of these things, but a supercharger system is typically fairly simple both to install in comparison and to run in comparison to a full turbocharged system. There's a lot of debate on this subject, but at the core of it, technically turbochargers are more efficient and therefore less hard on your engine than a supercharger. But so this video does not last literally forever, we'll cover one last myth that persists so heavily in the car community, which is whether or not you should let your car warm up in the morning when it is cold outside. Here are the facts. Some of the most wear and tear that is done to your vehicle over time is during cold startups. There's two major reasons for this. Your engine is full of a bunch of metal, and inherently metal, and like a lot of different materials, basically everything, contracts when it's cold. All of the individual clearances that your engine is designed with, it's designed to be optimized when the engine is at running temperature, obviously, because that's what it's going to be at most of the time. But that means that a lot of these things, as they contract, are not actually at the optimal clearances and stuff like that when your engine is cold, and that's why you get more wear and tear when it's cold, as well as obviously lubricants in your engine oil are typically thicker when they're cold, and it takes a second for them to get pumped into everywhere where they're supposed to be in your engine. Obviously, while they're cold, they're not going to flow as easily when they're cold, and as an engine sits, a lot of that oil is going to drain back down into the pan and not be covering everything like it would be if you were to shut off your car and start it only a couple minutes later while it's still warm. With all of that being said, is it a better idea to let your car warm up in the morning? Well, personally, I would say yes. Let your car warm up for a couple minutes, and the reason being is while those clearances are not at their optimum, and while the oil is a little bit thicker than normal and is flowing to all the places where it's supposed to be, I'd prefer my engine to be having the least rotations possible, just sitting at idle and essentially inflicting less wear on everything while it's just warming up a little bit. Now, it is true, obviously the best way you can warm up your vehicle is by driving it, and is by getting those RPMs up a little bit, not very high. You don't want to destroy everything, obviously. And that's an argument that a lot of people will make to say that, letting your engine sit there and idle and warm up is actually the worst thing for it. Ultimately, you can do what you will with this information. My personal advice is letting your engine warm up for a couple minutes is a very good idea to let the fluids get moving and let all of those clearances just get back to where they're supposed to be and expand a little bit, just for a minute or two before you drive. And then when you do drive slowly until you see the coolant temperature creep up to its normal range. And if your car has an oil temperature gauge, that's also super handy, especially when that one gets up, because that tells you even more what you want to know. But a lot of vehicles don't have those stock. But just let things get up to operating temperature before you beat on the car much at all. Some people take this to the extreme and they say that, you know, they want to get it warmed up as quickly as possible to get all of those tolerances tightened up and all of the oil up to the correct temperature. Whatever way you see it, personally, I do think that it's overkill to let your car sit and idle for 20 minutes before you get into it in the morning. I also think that it's probably not the best idea to get in your car and start driving it immediately when it's really cold out. I think somewhere in the middle is probably the best place to land, and that's typically where I do. But there's not really a direct yes or no, is this myth true or not, and whether it's better to warm up your car in the morning. All you can do is take this information and do what you will with it to make an educated decision, as every one of us has to. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have more content coming all the time. I upload every Wednesday or Thursday and Saturday, and I will see you guys in the next one.